There is a moment in the first episode of The Bear when a young chef named Carmen walks into a restaurant kitchen he has just inherited and looks around at the chaos, the noise, the grease, the barely contained dysfunction of a place that has been running on inertia and grief for longer than anyone wants to admit. And you can see on his face two things simultaneously: the absolute certainty that this is wrong, that none of this is how it should be, and the equally absolute certainty that he is going to stay anyway, that he is going to try. That something in him, something older and more stubborn than his grief or his exhaustion or his very reasonable conviction that this situation is impossible, has already decided. Tonight we are going to spend time with that moment, and with everything it contains. We are going to talk about The Bear, not just as a television series, which it is, and an extraordinary one, but as something that has touched a specific nerve in a specific cultural moment. As a story about broken people who show up anyway. About the strange and difficult and sometimes beautiful thing that happens when people who are not okay decide to build something together. But first, get comfortable. Let your body settle. Let the noise of your day begin to fade. Whatever you are carrying right now, the weight of it, the unfinished parts, the things you are not sure how to handle, you can set it down for a little while. It will be there when you need it. Tonight, you just have to be here. If this kind of storytelling is what you come here for, a like or a subscription means more than you might think to a small channel like this one. It is how these stories find the people who need them. Now let everything else go. We are going to Chicago. We are going to a restaurant on the west side of the city, and we are going to meet a family, because that is what they are, even when they are trying very hard not to be. That is in the middle of something very difficult and building something very real at the same time. The Bear premiered on Hulu in June 2022, created by Christopher Storer, who had previously worked on Raimi and other projects but had never made something quite like this. It was shot in Chicago, in a real restaurant space, with a visual style that was deliberately immediate and kinetic. Handheld cameras, tight spaces, the controlled chaos of a working kitchen rendered with a fidelity that made viewers who had never worked in a restaurant feel like they understood something true about what it was like, and made viewers who had worked in a restaurant feel seen in a way they had not expected from a television drama. The show was not a comfortable watch. It was not designed to be. From its first minutes, it put the viewer inside a space that was too loud and too fast and too pressurized, and it did not let up. And this turned out to be exactly what a significant portion of its audience had been waiting for, without knowing they were waiting for it. The story begins with a death. Michael Berzato, the owner of a beef sandwich restaurant called the Original Beef of Chicagoland, the Beef, everyone calls it, has died by suicide, and his younger brother Carmen, known as Carmy, has left a career at some of the best restaurants in the world to come home and take over. This is the premise, and it is a premise full of grief and obligation and the specific weight of family businesses, which carry not just the economic stakes of any business, but the accumulated emotional history of the people who built them, who worked in them, who fought in them, who sometimes destroyed themselves trying to keep them going. Carmy has come home because Michael left it to him. And because you come home when something like this happens, even when home is complicated, even when the thing you are coming home to makes no immediate sense, and the people there are strangers in some ways, and too familiar in others. Carmen Berzato is played by Jeremy Allen White, who was known before The Bear primarily for his work on Shameless, another Chicago set drama about a family holding itself together through varying degrees of dysfunction and crisis. What White does with Carmy is something that is difficult to describe without resorting to the word inhabited. He is inside this character in a way that makes the character feel less like a performance and more like a person you are observing. Carmy is someone who has built his entire identity around being extraordinary at one thing, who has spent years in kitchens where the standards were absolute and the pressure was constant and the only acceptable outcome was perfection, and who has done this partly because he is genuinely gifted, and partly because being extraordinary at something is a way of not having to be ordinary at the harder parts of being a person. He has run from his family and from his grief by being very, very good at cooking, and now he is back in his family's kitchen, and the cooking is the only part of any of this he actually knows how to do. The kitchen he has inherited is not his kitchen. This is perhaps the first thing that needs to be understood about the situation Carmy walks into. The Original Beef is staffed by people who have known him since he was a child, who knew Michael better than he did, who have their own relationships to this place and their own ways of doing things, and their own entirely legitimate reasons for resisting the changes that Carmy immediately and somewhat tactlessly begins to implement. There is Richie, Michael's best friend, who runs the front of house with a loyalty to Michael's memory that expresses itself partly as genuine love and partly as an inability to accept that anything needs to be different from how Michael had it. There is Tina, who has worked the line for years and who is skeptical of Carmy in the specific way that experienced people are skeptical of young people who arrive with credentials and certainty in environments where experience and local knowledge are the real currency. There is Marcus, the pastry cook, who is talented and eager and has been underutilized in a kitchen that never had the infrastructure to develop what he could become. And there is Sugar, Carmy's sister Natalie, who manages the business and who is carrying her own relationship to Michael's death and to this place and to her brother in ways that the first season circles without fully revealing. And then there is Sydney Adamu, played by Ayo Edebiri, who arrives in the first episode as a new hire and who becomes, over the course of the series, something like the moral and emotional center of the show. Sydney is young and talented and has her own wounds. A failed restaurant venture, the weight of high expectations, the specific experience of being a young black woman in a professional kitchen that was not designed with her in mind. She and Carmy form a partnership that is the heart of the series, complicated and sometimes difficult and built on a mutual recognition that is also a mutual challenge. Each of them sees what the other is capable of, and neither of them is entirely comfortable being seen. What The Bear is doing in its first season is establishing a very specific kind of workplace drama, one in which the workplace is a pressure cooker in the most literal sense, and in which the pressure reveals things about the people inside it that they would prefer to keep hidden. The kitchen is a place where you cannot perform equanimity you do not feel, because there is no time and no space, and the stakes are too immediate. You are either functioning or you are not. You are either present or you are absent in ways that have immediate consequences for the people around you. The show uses this environment to strip its characters down to something essential and not always flattering and always recognizable as true. The second season of The Bear, released in June 2023, is where the show became something that transcended its initial premise and entered a different category of artistic achievement. If the first season was about a broken place trying to figure out what it was going to be, the second season is about people trying to figure out who they are going to be, and doing this in the context of building something new, transforming the beef into a fine dining restaurant called Simply the Bear, in a process that is as much internal as it is logistical. The second season is constructed unusually, with episodes that function almost as standalone films, each one centered on a different character, each one expanding the world of the show in ways that the ensemble format of the first season did not allow. There is an episode called Fishes that is the single most emotionally devastating piece of television in recent memory, a Christmas dinner set years before the events of the series, in which the full weight of the Berzatto family history is laid out in a single holiday meal that goes wrong in every way it is possible for a family gathering to go wrong, and which makes visible the specific damage that has been done to these people and the specific ways in which that damage was transmitted from one generation to the next. The episode features Jamie Lee Curtis as Donna Berzatto, the matriarch of the family, and her performance, chaotic, loving, terrifying, heartbreaking, is one of the finest pieces of acting in the history of the medium. There is an episode centered on Richie, sent by Carmy to stage, to work without pay as a learning experience, at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Chicago, who arrives expecting humiliation and discovers instead something like the beginning of who he might actually be. The episode is quiet and observational and funny and unexpectedly moving, and it does something that the best television does. It takes a character you have understood in a particular way and reveals a dimension that you did not know was there, that makes you reconsider everything you thought you knew about them while also making perfect sense in retrospect. There is an episode centered on Marcus, sent to Copenhagen to learn pastry from a chef he admires, who is also dealing with his mother's illness in a way that the show handles with extraordinary delicacy and care. There is an episode centered on Sydney, exploring her ambitions and her fears and the specific question of what she is willing to stake her future on. There is an episode centered on the logistics of the restaurant opening, supplies and equipment, and the 1,000 practical problems that stand between a vision and its realization, that is as tense and as propulsive as anything the show has produced. And running through all of it, in the second season and in the third that followed, is the question that the show is really asking. What does it cost to care this much? What does it cost to be a person who gives everything to something, who cannot do things halfway, who experiences their work not as a job, but as an extension of their identity and their worth? And is it possible to build something beautiful out of that kind of intensity without also destroying yourself and the people around you in the process? Carmy is the character in whom these questions are most explicitly dramatized, but he is not the only one asking them. Every character in The Bear is, in some sense, a version of the same question, someone who has been shaped by experiences they did not choose, who carries that shaping in their body and their behavior, and who is trying to figure out how to build a life that is worth living, given the specific and somewhat inconvenient person that those experiences have made them. The representation of mental health in The Bear is one of the things that has been most discussed by critics and viewers, and it is worth spending some time on because the show handles it with an unusualness that deserves recognition. Mental health in television drama is often presented as a binary. A character has a breakdown or a recovery, hits a visible bottom or achieves a visible healing, moves through a clearly delineated arc from dysfunction to something more functional. The Bear refuses this. Its characters are not getting better in any simple sense. They are managing. They are functioning. They are showing up every day in a situation that is genuinely difficult, with histories that have not been resolved and wounds that have not been healed, and they are doing their jobs. This is not a story about recovery. It is a story about persistence in the absence of recovery, which is a much more honest description of how most people actually live. Carmy goes to therapy, and the therapy scenes are among the most quietly radical in the show. Not because they depict some transformative insight or dramatic breakthrough, but because they depict the ordinary work of trying to understand yourself a little better than you did before, and failing sometimes, and trying again, and not being sure whether any of it is working. And continuing anyway. His therapist asks him questions he cannot answer. He goes back the next week. This is what most therapy actually looks like, and it is rarely what television shows us. The anxiety that runs through the show, particularly Carmy's, which is almost physical in its presence, a constant low-level hum that occasionally spikes into something more acute, is rendered with a specificity that people who live with anxiety have described as unusually accurate. Not the dramatic panic attack of film and television shorthand, but the chronic background noise of a nervous system that is always slightly too activated, that never quite trusts that the current situation is actually safe. The show does not treat this as a character flaw or a weakness. It treats it as a condition, something that Carmy has and that shapes how he moves through the world, that he manages with varying degrees of success. That is both part of what makes him extraordinary at his work and part of what makes his life so hard. The Berzato family history, slowly revealed across the seasons, explains some of this. The chaos of Donna's cooking, the emotional volatility of the household, Michael's struggles, the specific ways in which the children of difficult families learn to navigate the world. The show is interested in intergenerational trauma not as a concept, but as a lived experience, as the specific patterns of behavior and response that get laid down in childhood and that operate in adulthood, with a persistence that therapy and insight and good intentions cannot simply undo. You can understand where something came from and still be doing it. You can know that your anxiety is not rational and still feel it. You can love your family and still be damaged by them. The Bear holds all of these true things simultaneously without resolving them into something simpler. The kitchen itself, as a space, as a social environment, as a professional culture, is treated with a seriousness that is unusual for a television drama. The show consulted extensively with professional chefs and kitchen workers, and the result is a depiction of kitchen culture that people who have worked in restaurants find recognizable in ways that most media representations do not achieve. The hierarchy, the language, the specific dynamics between front of house and back of house, the way that a good kitchen service feels when everything is working, and the way that a bad one spirals. All of this is present with a texture and a specificity that earns the show genuine credibility with people who know what they are watching. But the kitchen culture in The Bear is not presented uncritically. The show is aware that the environment it is depicting, the intensity, the pressure, the expectation of total commitment, the history of abuse that has been embedded in professional kitchen culture and only recently begun to be seriously examined, is not simply romantic. Carmy is a chef formed in kitchens where the standards were extraordinary, and the methods of enforcing those standards were sometimes cruel, and he carries that formation in the way he treats people sometimes, in his impatience and his perfectionism, and his difficulty giving the people around him the grace that they need, and that he himself needs, but cannot ask for. The show's treatment of this is one of its most interesting elements. Carmy is not a villain. He is not even, most of the time, unkind. But he operates in a mode of intensity and demand that the people around him find difficult, and the show does not excuse this on the grounds of his talent or his grief or his genuine desire for the restaurant to succeed. It holds him accountable through Sydney's responses and through the consequences of his behavior in ways that are not punitive, but are honest. He is trying to do better. He does not always succeed. The gap between his intentions and his impact is one of the central tensions of the show. The bear arrived at a specific moment in the cultural conversation about work, the post-pandemic moment in which the terms of professional life were being renegotiated in real time, in which the restaurant industry in particular was experiencing a crisis of labor and meaning, and the accumulated weight of years of demanding conditions. The phrase "the restaurant industry is broken" had been circulating for years before the pandemic. The pandemic made it impossible to ignore. Chefs and kitchen workers left the industry in enormous numbers. The conversations that the industry had not had about mental health, about the culture of kitchen abuse, about the sustainability of the model were suddenly unavoidable. The bear entered this conversation not as an argument, but as an image. A vivid, specific, emotionally immediate picture of what it actually looks like to work in this environment, to care about it, to be consumed by it, to be trying to build something worth building inside it. The show did not resolve the questions it was raising. It dramatized them, with enough honesty that people inside the industry felt recognized, and people outside it felt educated, in the specific way that great dramatic work educates. Not by explaining, but by making you feel what it is like to be inside a situation you have not yourself experienced. There is something in The Bear that speaks to experiences far beyond the restaurant industry, and this is perhaps the clearest explanation of its broad cultural resonance. The experience of being someone who cares too much, who gives everything, who cannot do things halfway. This is not specific to chefs. The experience of working alongside people who are struggling, whose struggles affect the work and affect you, who you are bound to by circumstances or history, or simply by the fact of showing up in the same space every day. This is not specific to kitchens. The experience of trying to build something good out of materials that are imperfect, including yourself. This is one of the most universal human experiences there is. What the show captures with unusual precision is the specific texture of what it is like to be in a team of people who are all carrying something. Not dramatically, not in ways that are always visible, but in the thousand small adjustments that people make when they are managing something internal while also managing the demands of the external. The way that Richie's grief from Michael sometimes expresses itself as aggression toward Carmy. The way that Sydney's self-doubt sometimes makes her hold back when she should speak up. The way that Tina's protectiveness of the old ways is also a protectiveness of her own sense of competence and belonging. These are not character flaws. They are human responses to human situations, and the show treats them with the care and the specificity that human responses deserve. The music in The Bear is worth its own extended consideration, because it is one of the ways the show communicates what it would be impossible to communicate through dialogue or image alone. The use of specific songs at specific moments, the way a piece of music will sometimes arrive in an episode like a key turning in a lock, opening something that has been closed, is consistently extraordinary. The Fishes episode in particular builds to a use of a piece of music that is one of the most precisely chosen moments of audio-visual alignment in recent television, arriving at exactly the moment when the emotional weight of what you have been watching requires somewhere to go, and providing it. The third season of The Bear, released in June 2024, was received with more divided responses than the first two, some critics finding it too slow, too interior, too willing to spend time in uncertainty without providing resolution. Others found it the most honest and the most formally ambitious of the three, a season that was willing to sit with the difficulty of its characters' situations without offering easy exits. The debate around the third season is itself interesting, because it reflects a question that the show has always been implicitly asking. How much difficulty are you willing to sit with, in art as in life? How long will you stay with something that is hard before you decide it is not worth it? The characters of The Bear have, by the third season, built the restaurant they set out to build. They have achieved something real, something that required everything they had. And the show is honest about what this costs, about the ways in which achievement does not resolve the underlying difficulties, about how you can accomplish something extraordinary and still not be okay, still not be done, still not have arrived at wherever it is you were trying to get to when you started. This is not a comfortable message. It is an honest one. What the show ultimately argues, if a show as committed to ambiguity as The Bear can be said to argue anything, is that showing up matters. That the act of continuing, of coming back, of trying again when what you produced yesterday was not what you wanted it to be, has a value that is not fully captured by outcomes. That the people who build things together, who weather difficulty together, who irritate and disappoint and occasionally hurt each other and keep showing up anyway, are doing something real, even when what they are building does not look the way they imagined it would. Carmy comes back to the kitchen. Every episode, Despite everything, despite the grief that has not resolved, and the anxiety that has not disappeared, and the family history that has not been undone, and the relationships that are complicated, and the standards he sets for himself that he cannot always meet, he comes back. And so does Sydney and Richie and Marcus and Tina and Sugar and all the others, each of them carrying what they carry, each of them showing up anyway. This is what the show is about, at its deepest level. Not the food, though the food is extraordinary, not the restaurant, though the restaurant matters enormously. The showing up. The decision, made again every day, to be present in something that is difficult and real and worth it. There is a scene in the second season, in the Richie episode, the one set at the fine dining restaurant where he is sent to stage, in which Richie, who has spent most of the series being loud and resistant and seemingly impervious to the kind of transformation the show is asking of its characters, has a moment of quiet recognition. He is doing something simple, folding napkins perhaps, or polishing silverware, and he is doing it with a care and a precision that he has not previously demonstrated, and you can see something shift in him, not a dramatic transformation. Not a revelation, just a small, quiet acknowledgement that this thing he is doing matters, that doing it well is its own form of respect for the people who will encounter it, that the details are not separate from the work, but are the work. It is a beautiful moment, and a small one, and the show gives it the time it deserves without announcing how significant it is. This is the quality that distinguishes The Bear from most television about work and ambition and the cost of caring too much. It knows that the significant moments are often small, that the changes that matter are often not dramatic, that the distance between who someone is at the beginning of a story and who they are at the end is often not a gulf but a shift, a small recalibration of how they hold themselves in relation to the world, what they are willing to pay attention to, what they are willing to try. The show earns its emotional moments by spending enormous amounts of time in the ordinary texture of the days that surround them, and by trusting that viewers will stay with that texture long enough for it to accumulate into something that hits you harder than you expected. The Bear is a show about a restaurant. It is also a show about grief and family and the specific ways in which the people who shape us in childhood continue to shape us long after we have left them, or they have left us. It is a show about what it means to work alongside people who are struggling, and about the particular intimacy that develops between people who share a difficult experience day after day. It is a show about ambition and its costs, and about whether the costs are worth it, and about the fact that this is a question you cannot answer in advance. You can only find out by doing it, and seeing what is left of you when you are done. And it is, underneath all of that, a show about showing up, about the people who come back every day, about what it means to be that kind of person, and what it costs, and why they do it anyway. If you recognize something in that, if there is a version of showing up in your own life, a kitchen of your own that you keep walking back into despite everything, then you already understand what The Bear is about. You do not need it explained to you. You just need someone to tell you that they see it, and that it matters, and that the showing up is not nothing. It is, in fact, everything. That is all for tonight. I hope this gave you somewhere quiet to rest, and something worth thinking about, if thinking is what you wanted, or something to drift away from, if sleep is what you needed. Both are good. Both are the point. If you made it this far, thank you. A like, a comment, a subscription. It all means more than you might think for a small channel like this one. It is how these stories find the people who need them. Sleep well. The kitchen will still be there in the morning. I will see you in the next one. The Chicago that The Bear inhabits is worth pausing on, because it is not the Chicago of most television dramas. It is not the lakefront or the loop or the architectural showpieces that appear in establishing shots when a production wants to signal that it is set in a serious American city. The Bear's Chicago is the West Side, the neighborhoods of working-class immigrant communities, the streets where a beef sandwich restaurant has been feeding the same families for generations. This is a Chicago that is specific and textured and real in ways that location shooting alone cannot produce. The show carries the city in its rhythms, and its relationships, and its particular understanding of what loyalty means in a community where people have been showing up for each other for a long time. The original Beef of Chicagoland is a fictional restaurant, but it is fictional in the way that the best fictional places are, so particular in its details that it feels like a place you have been, like a memory you have that you cannot quite place. The menu, the layout, the regulars who appear in the background, the specific way the kitchen smells on a Tuesday morning after a long Monday. None of this is invented from nothing. It is assembled from the kind of deep observation that requires spending real time in real places and paying genuine attention to what you find there. Christopher Storer and his collaborators clearly did this, and the result is a physical world that the show inhabits, rather than merely depicts. Food in The Bear is not decoration. This seems like an obvious thing to say about a show set in a restaurant, but it is worth saying because the food in most restaurant dramas is in fact decoration. Pretty images of beautiful dishes that serve primarily to signal that the characters care deeply about something without ever communicating what that caring actually feels like from the inside. The Bear communicates it. The way Carmy talks about food, the way he moves when he is cooking, the specific arguments he makes about technique and ingredient, and the relationship between the two, this is the language of someone who has thought very seriously about these things and who finds them genuinely important, not as metaphors for other things, but as things in themselves. The food matters, because it is what they are making. And what they are making matters, because making it is how they express what they cannot otherwise say. The beef sandwich at the center of the restaurant's identity. The Italian beef, a Chicago institution, a specific thing with a specific history and a specific constituency who are not shy about their preferences, functions in the show as both a practical anchor and a symbolic one. It is what the beef has always been, what Michael built his reputation on, what the regulars come for, and what Carmy's changes risk disrupting. The question of whether to keep the beef on the menu when the restaurant evolves into something more ambitious is not just a culinary question. It is a question about identity and continuity, and what you owe to the people who were there before you had any ambitions at all. The relationship between Carmy and Richie is one of the most carefully observed in the show, and it is worth examining at some length because it does something that relationships between men rarely do in dramatic television. It takes seriously the specific difficulty of two men who love each other, who are family in the ways that matter regardless of blood, and who express that love almost entirely through conflict. Richie resents Carmy for leaving, for succeeding in a world that Richie could not access, for coming back with credentials and certainty, and the implicit judgment that things at the beef were not being done correctly. Carmy is frustrated by Richie's resistance, his attachment to how Michael did things, his apparent inability to see that what the restaurant needs is change. Both of them are right, both of them are wrong, and neither of them can say directly what they actually feel, which is something closer to, I miss him too, and I don't know how to do this without him, and I'm scared that we're going to fail, and I need you to be okay even though I can see that you're not. What the show does with this relationship over time is something that requires patience to appreciate. It does not resolve the tension between them with a single dramatic confrontation or a tearful reconciliation. It allows the relationship to shift slowly through accumulated small interactions, through the experience of working alongside each other in a shared crisis, through moments of unexpected grace and unexpected failure. By the time the relationship has reached something that could be called understanding, not resolution, not peace, but something like mutual recognition, it has been earned through so much that the arrival feels both inevitable and surprising, which is the sign of writing that is doing what it should. Sydney's arc across the series is in some ways the most satisfying of the show's character trajectories, partly because it is the least burdened by the specific Berzato family weight that hangs over Carmy's story. Sydney arrives as someone who is talented and ambitious and has been knocked back, who is trying to figure out whether she trusts herself enough to try again, and whether she trusts Carmy enough to try with him. Her development over the seasons, from new hire navigating an unfamiliar kitchen, to chef developing her own culinary voice, to the creative force behind much of what the Bear becomes, is depicted with a care for the specificity of her experience that extends to the specificity of her position as a black woman in a professional cooking environment that has historically been inhospitable to her in particular ways. The show does not make this the center of Sydney's story. Her race and gender are part of who she is, part of the context she navigates, but she is not defined by them in the way that television dramas sometimes define characters of color by their identity rather than their interiority. She has a full interior life that the show explores with the same depth and the same patience it gives to Carmy, and Ayo Edebiri's performance makes that interior life present and specific in every scene. Even the scenes where Sydney is primarily reacting rather than acting, watching rather than doing. Marcus Washington, the pastry cook, receives some of the show's most tender treatment, a character whose gifts are evident and whose emotional life is handled with extraordinary delicacy. The episode in the second season that follows him to Copenhagen is one of the series' finest achievements precisely because it gives Marcus the space to be fully himself, curious, dedicated, grieving for his mother in a quiet and private way, without the noise and urgency that characterizes most of the show's storytelling. Copenhagen is quiet, and Marcus is quiet in it, and the episode's pace reflects the particular quality of attention that learning something new requires when you are also carrying something heavy. The scene in which he tastes a dish that surprises him, in which something in the food produces an involuntary response, a small gasp of recognition, the specific pleasure of encountering something that tells you something you did not know you needed to know, is one of those moments that makes you remember why you watch television at all. Tina Morero's transformation across the series is handled with such understatement that it is easy to miss how significant it is. She begins as an obstacle, resistant, skeptical, protective of the old ways in ways that read as obstruction. Over time, she becomes something more, a person who has been given an opportunity she did not expect and who is doing something real with it, who is developing as a professional in her 50s in a way that the kitchen she worked in for years never made possible. Her relationship with Carmy shifts from wariness to something like loyalty, not because he has proven himself to her in dramatic ways, but because she's watched him work and found him serious, which is, in the world of the show, the highest form of respect. The show's treatment of addiction and substance use is woven throughout in ways that are not always foregrounded but are always present. Several characters have histories with substances, and the show depicts this not as a defining characteristic, but as part of the complex of experiences that have shaped them, one thread in a larger pattern. The treatment is notably lacking in the stigma and the dramatic shorthand that usually characterize television depictions of addiction. The characters who have these histories are not defined by them, and the show does not use their struggles primarily as plot devices. They are just part of who these people are, and the show holds that with the same honesty it holds everything else. The cooking sequences in The Bear, the actual depictions of food being prepared, of a kitchen operating at speed during a service, of the specific choreography of professional cooking, are among the most cinematically accomplished things the show produces. The camera work in these sequences is remarkable, handheld and immediate, following the movement of hands and knives and pans with a fluidity that communicates the physical experience of cooking in a way that static shots never could. The editing in these sequences is equally impressive, the rhythm of cuts matching the rhythm of the kitchen, fast when the kitchen is fast, allowing space when space is needed. These sequences are doing narrative work, even when they appear to be primarily visual, communicating information about the state of the characters and the state of the kitchen that could not be communicated through dialogue. The episode's structure, in the second season, the one that follows a single day of frantic preparation for the restaurant's opening, dealing with a cascade of logistical disasters, is the purest expression of the show's interest in the relationship between the people and the work. The episode is constructed almost as a thriller, with mounting crises and near solutions and new crises, and it is exhausting to watch in a way that is deliberate and purposeful. By the time the episode ends, you have some physical sense of what this day has cost the characters who live through it. It is also very funny, in the way that genuinely desperate situations often are when you are inside them, and the only alternative to laughing is something worse. The Bear has received enormous critical attention for its formal innovations. The single-episode character studies, the real-time sequences, the unconventional structure of individual seasons, and this attention is deserved. But the show's formal sophistication is always in service of its emotional and human content, never a display of technique for its own sake. Every structural choice the show makes is in some way an attempt to get closer to the experience it is depicting, to find the form that is most honest to the feeling of being inside these characters' lives, inside this kitchen, inside this particular moment of trying to build something when everything is uncertain and the people doing the building are not okay. This is what distinguishes The Bear from the many shows that deal with similar themes: ambition, family, work, the cost of caring, without achieving the same effect. The show earns its emotional impact through the accumulation of specific, precisely observed details over time. It does not reach for feeling. It creates the conditions in which feeling becomes inevitable, through patience and honesty and a commitment to showing you what is actually happening rather than telling you how you should feel about it. The moment when something in the show breaks through, when you find yourself unexpectedly moved, or unexpectedly seen, or unexpectedly grateful that someone made this thing, is a moment that has been prepared for at length, through everything that came before it. The cultural moment in which The Bear arrived is worth some consideration, because timing in art is never entirely accidental. The show premiered in June 2022, more than 2 years into a global pandemic that had devastated the restaurant industry specifically, and disrupted the relationship between people and their work more generally. The conversations that the pandemic had forced, about what work was for, what it was worth, what people were willing to give for it, and what they were not, were still very much ongoing. The Great Resignation was happening. Quitting had become terms of the implicit contract between employers and employees were being renegotiated in real time, and the restaurant industry was one of the places where this renegotiation was most visible and most urgent. The bear arrived into this moment not as an argument, but as an image. A sustained, specific, emotionally immediate image of people for whom the old contract, the one that said you gave everything and the work gave back meaning, was still operative. Characters who had not yet fully internalized the lessons that the pandemic had forced on others, who were still organized around their kitchens in ways that the world was beginning to question. The show did not advocate for this orientation. It depicted it with honesty, showing both what was extraordinary about the dedication it produced and what it cost in health and relationships, and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being so organized around one thing that everything else becomes secondary. The audiences who responded most strongly to The Bear were, by most accounts, people who recognized something of themselves in this depiction, people who worked in high-pressure environments, people who had difficulty separating their professional identity from their personal one, people who found it easier to be excellent at their work than to be present in their relationships, people who were, in various ways, not okay, and who had organized their lives around the not being okay in ways that were productive and costly simultaneously. For these viewers, The Bear was not primarily a show about restaurants. It was a show about them, about the specific experience of being a person for whom caring is both a gift and a burden, and who has not yet fully worked out how to be that person without it consuming everything else. There is a word that gets used frequently in discussions of The Bear, and it is the word authentic. Critics and viewers alike reach for it when trying to explain why the show affects them the way it does, why it feels different from other prestige dramas that deal with similar themes. The word is imprecise. Authenticity is not a quality that exists independently of the person perceiving it, but it points towards something real. The show feels true, not true in the sense of being a documentary record of actual events, but true in the sense of being honest about the experience it is depicting, of not flinching from the difficulty or the ugliness, while also not dismissing the beauty and the meaning that exist alongside them. It trusts its characters to be complicated. It trusts its viewers to handle that complication. It trusts, above all, that the thing it is trying to say is worth saying, and that saying it honestly is the only way it can matter. The award's recognition that The Bear received was extraordinary, and also, in retrospect, entirely predictable. The show swept the comedy categories at the Emmy Awards in 2023, winning Outstanding Comedy Series and Outstanding Lead Actor and Outstanding Supporting Actor, and a remarkable number of other prizes. A sweep that was notable partly because the show is not, in any conventional sense of the word, a comedy. It is funny sometimes, in the way that life is funny, in the way that desperate situations produce gallows humor as a survival mechanism. But it is not a comedy. It is a drama about difficult things, rendered with a formal precision and an emotional intensity that the drama categories should have celebrated first. The fact that it won in comedy reflects something about the Television Academy's categorization systems, more than it reflects something about the show itself. But the conversation around the categorization, the genuine debate about whether The Bear was a comedy or a drama, and what the distinction even means, and whether the traditional categories adequately describe what prestige television has become, was itself a reflection of the show's ambition. It did not fit neatly into existing categories because it was doing something that existing categories had not been built to describe. This is usually a sign that a piece of work has done something new. Jeremy Allen White's performance as Carmy is one of the great achievements of American television acting in the past decade, and it deserves more extended consideration than it usually receives in discussions of the show. The praise tends to be lavish but general, remarkable, devastating, transcendent, without capturing what specifically makes it work. What White does that is unusual is that he makes Carmy's intelligence visible, not in the way that television dramas usually make intelligence visible, through expository dialogue, through characters commenting on how smart the protagonist is, through the protagonist solving problems in ways that signal cleverness. He makes it visible through the quality of attention that Carmy brings to everything. The way he watches a dish being plated, the way he listens to Sydney when she is telling him something about a recipe, the way he processes a problem in the kitchen with a speed and specificity that you can actually see in the micro-expressions of his face. This is extraordinarily difficult to do, and White does it consistently across multiple seasons without it ever feeling effortful. Ayo Edebiri's performance as Sydney is equally remarkable, and has perhaps received slightly less attention, possibly because the emotional temperature of Sydney's storyline is slightly lower than Carmy's, less given to crisis, and more given to the kind of sustained uncertainty that is harder to point to in specific scenes, but that accumulates into something significant across a season. Adibiri communicates Sydney's intelligence and ambition and self-doubt simultaneously, which is a technical challenge. All three of these qualities have to be present at once without any of them collapsing the others, without the self-doubt making her seem weak, or the ambition making her seem unsympathetic, or the intelligence making her seem cool in ways that prevent the vulnerability from landing. She manages this consistently, and the result is a character who is as fully realized as any in the show. Eben Moss-Bachrach as Richie and Abby Elliott as Natalie and Lionel Boyce as Marcus and Liza Colon-Zayas as Tina are each doing work that in any other show would be the lead performance, the amount of care and specificity that each of them brings to characters who in a lesser production would be supporting players is one of the reasons the ensemble of The Bear is so unusually rich. The show has cast people who are capable of doing more than they are usually asked to do, and then it has asked them to do it, and the result is a world that feels fully inhabited in every corner, not just at the center where the protagonist stands. The cinematography of The Bear, shot primarily by Andrew Wade and a team of camera operators, is doing things that television cinematography rarely does. The choice to shoot predominantly handheld, in tight spaces with a naturalistic lighting approach that often feels like it is using the available light of the kitchen environment rather than adding to it, creates a visual texture that is immediately distinctive and that serves the show's content in specific ways. The kitchen is small and hot and crowded, and the camera is small and hot and crowded with it. When the kitchen expands, when there is a moment of stillness, when a character steps outside into the Chicago air, when the pace of the editing opens up, you feel the expansion as a physical relief, which is what the characters feel it as. The cinematography puts you inside the experience rather than observing it from outside. The writing of The Bear, Storer leads a writer's room that includes Joanna Kahlo, Renee Goob, and others, achieves something that is rarer than it might appear. It writes dialogue that sounds like people talking, rather than like people saying things that advance the plot. The conversations in The Bear are often oblique, often interrupted, often moving in directions that are not immediately obvious, and the information they contain about character and relationship is often carried in what is not said, rather than what is said. This requires a particular kind of attention from the viewer, and it rewards that attention with the specific satisfaction of understanding something that has been communicated subtly rather than directly, the satisfaction of having been trusted with something rather than having it explained. One of the most frequently discussed aspects of The Bear is its pacing, particularly in the first season, which moves at a speed that some viewers find exhilarating and others find exhausting. The kitchen sequences in particular are cut with an urgency that refuses to let the viewer settle, that keeps the tension at a level that would be unsustainable in most dramatic contexts, but that the show maintains through sheer commitment and craft. The editing, primarily by Adam Epstein and a team of editors, is doing something sophisticated here. It is calibrating the level of tension precisely, knowing when to release and when to hold, using the rhythm of cuts as a form of emotional argument. The show's pacing is not relentless by accident. It is relentless by design, because the experience of watching it is meant to carry some faint echo of the experience of being inside it. The Bear has influenced the television that has followed it in ways that are already visible and that will become more visible over time. The single-character episode format, the integration of food and cooking as narrative content rather than visual backdrop, the willingness to leave significant things unresolved at the end of a season, these are approaches that other shows have adopted with varying degrees of success. The influence is also visible in a more general way, in the increasing willingness of prestige television to engage seriously with workplaces and the people who inhabit them, to treat professional environments as spaces of genuine human drama, rather than mere settings for the personal stories that unfold within them. The show has also influenced the broader cultural conversation about the restaurant industry and about high-pressure work environments more generally. It has been discussed in publications aimed at culinary professionals, in conversations among therapists who treat people in demanding careers, in the growing body of writing about burnout and the relationship between work and identity and mental health. It has provided a shared reference point for people trying to articulate experiences that are difficult to articulate, the experience of being someone who cannot do things halfway, who finds it easier to work than to rest, who has organized their life around a demanding pursuit in ways that are both meaningful and costly. Returning to the question that the show raises, and that it never quite answers, what does it cost to care this much, and is it worth it? The honest answer is that the bear does not think there is a single correct answer. What it offers instead is a sustained, honest, deeply felt exploration of what the question actually involves. It shows you the cost in the most specific terms it can find. It shows you what is built in spite of the cost. It does not tell you how to weigh these things against each other, because it knows that this is a weighing that each person has to do for themselves, with whatever resources they have, given whatever situation they're actually in. What it does instead, what it manages to do across 3 seasons of extraordinary television, is make you feel that the people trying to do this weighing are not alone, that the difficulty of the question is not a sign that something is wrong with you for finding it difficult, that showing up to something hard over and over without certainty about whether it is working or whether it is worth it is one of the most human things there is, that the kitchen, whatever form your kitchen takes, whatever it is that you keep walking back into, is a place where real things happen and real things are built, and that the people inside it, however imperfect and however broken, are doing something that matters. The future of the bear, whether it will continue beyond 3 seasons, what form it might take if it does, is uncertain at the time of this writing, and perhaps it is right that it should be. The show has always been comfortable with uncertainty, has always trusted that not knowing is sometimes the most honest position available. What is certain is that what it has already made exists, and will continue to exist, and will continue to find the people who need it. The first person who discovers the bear in 5 years, who sits down to watch it without knowing what they are getting into, will find something that was made with enormous care and enormous skill, that is honest about things that are difficult to be honest about, that sees people with a generosity and a precision that is rare in any art form and exceptionally rare in one as expensive and as commercial as prestige television. They will find the kitchen and the people in it, and the particular quality of attention that the show pays to both. And they will understand what we mean when we say that it is one of the great things television has made. Not the greatest, not the last word, but real and true, and worth the time it takes to receive it. The last image of the bear that stays with me, and I suspect with many people who have watched it, is not a dramatic one. It is Carmy in his kitchen, early, before anyone else has arrived, doing the kind of preparation work that is invisible to anyone who will eat in the restaurant later. Checking the mise en place, tasting something, adjusting something, doing the 1,000 small things that have to happen before the day can begin. He is alone and the kitchen is quiet, and he is exactly where he has chosen to be. Exactly. He looks present. He looks like someone who has decided, in full knowledge of what the decision costs, that this is where he is going to be. There is something in that specific image of a specific person choosing, again, to show up, that feels like what the show has been building toward all along. Not a resolution, a decision, not an answer, a commitment. This, the show seems to say, is what it looks like. This is what it costs. This is why people do it anyway.